Welcome in or welcome back. Today we are going to be continuing and finishing the August Reckoning Eclipse Chronicle, a mythological epic in 5 paths covering the astrological alignments between July 20th through to the full moon on July 29th, and then the total solar eclipse on August 12th. Okay? So, yeah. Also, I wanted to clarify something. In one of my last videos, I mentioned about Elon Musk and how on the 24th he's supposedly launching, like, satellites into the sky. And then, like, these, like, bigger satellites than he's ever done before or whatever, supposedly. And then he's just, like, gonna make them fall back into the atmosphere and burn up, and then all the metal and stuff is gonna, like, pollute the earth, basically. I don't know what the purpose of him doing this is. I didn't really look into it at all. I just heard, like, Stefan Burns, the geologist, mentioned it. But in one of my last videos, whenever I mentioned that, I said he's doing it on the full moon. I don't know if that was like a Freudian slip of the tongue or something like that, but the 24th is not the full moon. The full moon's the 29th, but it makes me think, because knowing myself and knowing how my mind works and how spirit works through me, anything I say where it seems like it's a mistake, it's usually done for a reason. So I think there's something there regarding the full moon. Like, he's just doing something involving the moon. Okay? So, just putting that out there. Alright, let's just dive into here. We are finishing off part 4. I ran out of time, so there's just 2 paragraphs, and then we're going to go into part 5, okay? So, we left off where I think Lysander met up with the group at the Eclipse site, and then Saren and, like, everybody, it just was talking about everybody showing up. Saren, Callista, Zephyr. Alright, it was talking about Callista and her knife, right? She sharpened it 100 times in the dark, and she held it in her hands in the last of the night, feeling its weight, its old meaning, its long history, as the thing she was going to use for revenge if she ever found the right moment and the right target, and the thing she had never used and would now never use, not because she was incapable, but because she had chosen the other instrument, the root, the medicine of exposure and truth, and the blade had been decommissioned by that choice without ever having been welded. Alright. Okay. She held it until the sky began to lighten in the east, and above the eastern hill, she saw Aldebaran setting, the bull's red eye going down as the dawn came up. And she looked at the knife one last time, and she set it on the ground beside the fire, not buried yet, not yet. The crossroads burial was for the moment of totality. Across the bowl, 2 of the sleeping forms stirred. The sky went pink. Antares was still visible in the south, barely. The last red star to hold its ground against the arriving light. And then the sun came up, and all the stars were gone. And the 5 people who had each walked a different impossible road were all in the same bowl of earth, and the eclipse was 12 hours away. Part 5, Totality, August 12th. Let all who are gathered in this place know what is coming. The devourer approaches from the west. moving at the speed of shadow, at the speed of truth. Which is always faster than we expect. This is not destruction. This is the necessary dark that the light requires in order to remember what it is. Stand here. Do not look away. What you are about to see is yourself, stripped of the light you borrowed and the shadow you built, standing in the corona of your own becoming. Callista of the Veil, spoken at dawn, August 12th. Part 1, the morning. The day of the eclipse began in the ordinary manner of August days on the Highland Plateau. With heat arriving early, the sun asserting itself from the first moment of its appearance above the eastern hills. The sky going from pale gold to a white blue that had the quality of intensity rather than gentleness. The grasses in the bowl moved in the small morning wind. The dark volcanic earth held the night's coolness for perhaps an hour after sunrise and then surrendered it. The 5 of them were awake before the sun. Each had slept or not slept according to their nature and their history and the particular quality of what the night had been, which was different for each of them but shared a common thread. The way dreams in the same house sometimes share imagery without sharing content. Each of them had dreamed of a door. Each of the doors had been different. Each of them had walked through it. They made a fire. They ate what they had. Saren had provisions. Zephyr had provisions. Lysander's man had brought good food and was quietly serving it to everyone without distinction, which Peleus noted and did not comment on, but filed in the growing archives of ways his lord had changed in the past 3 weeks. Morgan made tea from herbs that she had brought from the marsh, a preparation she had made for this day specifically. From plants that she had gathered at dawn on the first day of August with the intention of concentration and clarity and the opening of what needs to be open. They drank the tea. They sat around the fire in the warming day and they talked a little because there was not much left to say that was in the register of language. The processing had been done in the previous 3 weeks. The talking had happened through the night around the fire. What remained was the thing itself, the being present for the thing itself. And for that, talking was either preparation or avoidance. And they were past the point where avoidance was possible or useful. Callista spent the morning in the center of the bowl, not sitting but moving, a slow, purposeful circuit of the space 7 times clockwise, pausing at each of the 4 stones she had laid at the compass points to touch it and speak very quietly to whatever the stone represented. She was warming up in the way that singers warm up before a performance that will ask everything of them. Not because the voice needs to be trained, but because the body needs to be reminded of what it is capable of and invited explicitly and with full attention to be capable of it. Zephyr sat on the eastern edge of the bowl with the encrypted notebook open and read through the manifesto beginning to end for the last time before the broadcast. They had added in the boat and in the tunnel and in the night conversations what Morrigan had told them it needed, their own voice. Not just their arguments, their name, their actual name. Not the operational handle and the story of why they had done what they had done and the account of what it had cost and the acknowledgement that they were afraid and they were doing it anyway. The Prometheus who hides his face while he gifts the fire is still a liberator, but the gift arrives without its author, and the gifts without authors can be claimed by anyone. This gift needed to be theirs. Lysander walked to the southern edge of the bowl and looked toward the two mountains, between which Antares rose, and he stood there for a long time with the summer crown, not on his head, and the ring on his hand that he was deciding, he realized whether to keep it or remove. He kept it. The ring was his grandmother's lineage as much as his grandfather's. He kept it because it connected him to Sarah, 14 years old, taken from the eastern provinces, who had built something from that situation that had survived his grandfather's architecture by outlasting it. Had seeded in her descendants a tradition of something more authentic than her captor had ever achieved. He was going to carry that forward. The ring stayed. What changed was what he understood it to mean. Saren sat at the center of the bowl, near the fire, with the journal of blank pages open across their knees. They had been writing in it since the Axis plane. Not the deliberate record of a scholar, but the instinctive outpouring of someone who has carried something wordless for years and has suddenly found that words are available. They wrote through the morning. They were writing about lightness, about what it felt like to move through the world without the weight, about the way in which their entire sense of self had been organized around the carrying, and the strange, slowly exhilarating project of becoming someone without that architecture, of building new identity from materials that did not include shame as a structural element. Morgan sat at the western edge of the bowl with the knife in the grass beside her, and she was not doing anything that could be described. She was being, in the way that the marsh had taught her to be, present without agenda, attending without forcing, holding a space for what was going to move through it without trying to determine in advance what the movement would look like. She had discovered in the 18 years of the marsh exile that this was not passivity. It was the most active thing she knew how to do. It required the full engagement of everything she was. It simply engaged it without the deployment of force. At mid-morning, the air pressure changed, barely perceptibly, as though a very large, slow breath had been drawn somewhere above them. A change in the atmospheric character that had nothing to do with the weather. They each felt it at the same moment. And they each looked up at the same moment, and the sky above the bowl was entirely clear and brilliant and blue and showed nothing unusual. But it was coming. They could all feel that it was coming. The shadow was on its way. Part 2, First Contact. At 47 minutes past noon, the moon made its first incursion on the face of the sun. The alignment was exact. The mathematical precision of orbital mechanics, which had been building toward this configuration for months, and in some sense for the 4 billion years of the moon's companionship with Earth, both of them carrying the specific geometry of their relationship the way two people who have been together long enough carry the particular knowledge of each other's rhythms. I was going to say wisdom. The moon moved, as it always had, in its ancient path. The sun held its position as it always had. The shadow of the moon began its slow crossing of the face that gave the earth its light. The moment of first contact was visible only to those who knew to look for it, and who looked with the right protection, the filtered glass that turns the blazing disk into something manageable and shows on its edge the dark beginning of the moon's bite. Callista had 4 pieces of filtered glass, and she passed them to the others, and they stood in the bowl in the brilliant heat of the August noon, and they watched. By the way, I've looked at a total solar eclipse before, and I didn't go blind or anything, but it was clouded. It was only like 90-something% visible or whatever, and there was like some clouds. It did make my vision, like, I don't remember exactly, but I know it did, like, do something, but I don't buy into all that hype. But use your own discernment. Do whatever feels best for you, okay? Callista had 4 okay. So, the light changed before the eye could detect the change in the sun itself. This was the phenomenon that all the Eclipse Chronicles mentioned. That the quality of illumination shifted first, before the quantity of it, as though the light became aware of what was happening to its source before the source was visibly affected. The shadows on the ground sharpened. The blue of the sky intensified by a fraction towards something slightly unreal, slightly too saturated, the blue of a painting of blue rather than the blue of ordinary day. Animals in the distance, a flock of what might have been geese, crossing the bowl's rim, altered their course suddenly, wheeling south and then east for no visible reason. Geese came up in a reading recently. There, Callista said quietly, and each of them looked through their filtered glass and saw it, the dark edge. The beginning, the moon's disk moving in absolute silence across the sun's face, taking its first bite of the light that had been burning in that precise position in the sky for 8 minutes and 20 seconds. The light they were seeing was 8 minutes old. Was light that had left the sun 8 minutes ago and had traveled 93 million miles to arrive at this bowl on the highland plateau to be received by these 5 people in this particular moment of their lives. It's begun, Saren said. It had begun. The partial phase, the slow, deliberate process by which the moon consumed the sun's disk arc by arc, degree by degree, lasted for nearly an hour and a half. In that hour and a half, the world changed in ways that were gradual and therefore more shocking than any sudden change could have been, because the gradual allowed time for adjustment and anticipation, and neither adjustment nor anticipation proved adequate. The light went from noon brilliant to something cooler and stranger, a quality of illumination that had no analog in ordinary experience. Not dawn, not dusk, not cloudy afternoon. Something outside the known categories. The shadows moved and distorted. The temperature dropped with a slowness that the body registered as wrongness. The way you register a door that swings the wrong way. Not dangerous exactly, but fundamentally contrary to expectation. Around them, the highland plateau was not silent. In the distance, the sounds of the natural world were performing a slow version of the reversal that would become complete at totality. Daytime sounds diminishing, the birds that sing at day going quiet, the first tentative sounds of the night insects, beginning to consider whether this was the appropriate moment for their emergence. The ecosystem was parsing the same question the 5 humans were parsing. What exactly is happening, and what does it require of us? Lysander stood through the partial phase with his face turned up to the narrowing crescent, wearing the filtered glass. He was thinking about Sarah. He had been thinking about Sarah for 2 weeks, and the quality of the thinking had changed, had moved from the first shock of revelation through the complex stage of having to restructure 30 years of self-understanding, and was now arriving at something simpler and more direct. He was thinking she was a person. She was a specific person with a specific history and specific gifts and a specific kind of survival intelligence that had clearly been formidable. And I have been carrying her in my blood my entire life without knowing what I was carrying, without honoring what I was carrying. The empire he had built on her grandson's head had missed the point of her entirely. The question was what it would mean to not miss the point going forward in the time he had left. Zephyr was making final preparations for the transmission. They had the equipment they needed in the bag, minimal by design, because the Uranian network preferred simplicity at maximum moments. They had the manifesto, they had their name on it, they had in the inside of their pocket of their coat the small dark glass vial from Morrigan, which they had opened and smelled that morning. It smelled of salt water and dark root and something that might have been iron or might have been the smell of conviction. And had not drunk, not yet, because the timing of it was important, and the timing was not yet. Morgan had the knife in her hands, and she was not nervous. She had moved through nervousness into the country on the other side of it. Not fearlessness, because she had too much respect for the forces in play to pretend she was not engaged with them, but a specific kind of readiness that was the opposite of the tight-strung tension of anxiety. She was present. She was ready to move when the moment called for movement, and to be still when the moment called for stillness. And she had, in 18 years of the marsh, become very good at telling the difference. Saren had put the journal away. They needed no more words. What they needed, what they were, in the narrowing light, entirely occupied with, was the feeling. The feeling of the weight being gone, of having walked through the gate, of being on the other side of the wall. And the feeling of this place, this bowl, this alignment, Antares invisible in the noon sky above its southern mountain, Aldebaran invisible behind its northern one, but both there, both present, the axis between them as real as gravity. And the feeling of being held by it rather than crushed by it, the axis as a gate rather than a wall, the structure that had been imprisoning now understood as the structure that was liberating. Saturn, the Lord of Limitation, who is also in the old mythology the Lord of the Harvest, the Lord of what structure, and of what structure, when its time is complete, releases. Callista stood at the center, and she was already partially elsewhere. The voices had been building since dawn and were now at a level that occupied most of her processing capacity. The dead who had been waiting for this moment, who had been quayed in the Mercury Chronos Hades channel for years, some of them for decades, some of them for centuries, who had specific things to say to specific people and had been holding these messages in trust, for the oracle body that could carry them. She was managing the volume with the discipline of long practice, holding the gate open enough for awareness without being entirely subsumed. When totality came, she would stop managing. She would let it all through. That was the arrangement. That was what this day required. Part 3, the diamond ring. The sun's crescent narrowed. By 10 minutes before totality, it was a thin, brilliant arc, a burning parenthesis of light in the sky above the darkening plateau. By 5 minutes before, it was a sliver, a thread, a suggestion of itself. The sky had turned to the color of deep ocean, a blue so saturated and so strange that it seemed to pulse, to have a quality of aliveness that the ordinary blue noon sky lacked, as though the ordinary sky was a surface and this was something below the surface, visible only when the surface was removed. Stars appeared in the daytime, stars in the daytime sky, appearing one by one, then in pairs, and then as the familiar constellations reconfigured in the blue dark, visible only because the eye's cone cells, starved of the blazing noon light they expected, were expanding and finding the light that was always there but usually overwhelmed. Antares appeared first, exactly where it should have been, exactly where the map had always said it was, the heart of the scorpion, burning its red coal, the first visible star in the eclipse sky. And then, a moment later in the north, in the area of the sky above the northern hill, Aldebaran, the eye of the bull, answering it across the full width of the darkening dome. The 5 of them saw it simultaneously, the axis, visible. Both stars at once in the daytime sky, holding their ancient conversation across the vault of heaven. And between them, directly overhead, the sun and moon locked in their perfect alignment. The moon's disk positioned with the mathematical precision of 4 billion years of shared orbit. Centered on the sun with a completeness that was, from every angle, total. Look, Saren whispered to no one, to everyone, to the stars and the sky and the aligned geometry of everything. The last thread of the sun disappeared. For one breath, the held breath of the world, there was a single point of light, one bead, one diamond, one final burning jewel of direct sunlight peeking around the last edge of the moon's limb, the diamond ring. The last of the sun before the sun was gone. It blazed with a ferocity disproportionate to its size, the way last things often do, the last light of a fire, the last note of a song, the last word of conversation that will not be resumed. And then it went out. And the corona appeared. Part 4, totality. The corona was not white. It was not the white of paper or snow or cloud or any other white that human experience provided adequate preparation for. It was the white of fire that had transcended heat, the white of something burning at a temperature for which ordinary language has no register. It blazed from the black disk of the moon in a crown of such pure and terrifying beauty that the most appropriate response was not awe, but something prior to awe, the full body recognition of being in the presence. Hold on. I totally lost track of where I was. I think that hopefully this is where I was. It was the white of fire that has transcended heat. The white of something burning at a temperature for which ordinary language has no register. It blazed from the black disk of the moon in a crown of such pure and terrifying beauty that the most appropriate response was not awe, but something prior to awe. The full body recognition of being in the presence of a scale that the individual self cannot contain or process and must simply, helplessly receive. The corona extended in streamers and petals and plumes of light in all directions from the dark center, reaching, it seemed, toward the stars that had appeared in the darkened sky, toward Antares and Aldebaran on their opposite horizons, toward the horizon itself, where the eclipse shadow made a ring of false sunset in every direction simultaneously, a 360-degree dusk that had never existed before this moment and would never exist again in exactly this configuration. The totality shadow was moving across the plateau at nearly half a mile per second, and they were inside it. Inside the moon shadow and the small cone of perfect darkness that the geometry of the alignment cast onto the Earth's surface. And the inside of the shadow was the most completely and completely differently illuminated place any of them had ever stood. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in 6 seconds. The insects that had been beginning their tentative consideration of evening erupted into full night song simultaneously. Something large, an eagle perhaps, or the Highland falcon that nested in the northern hills, called once a single note of pure biological confusion, and then was silence. Callista opened. This is the only way to describe it. She opened the way a flower opens, not by doing anything, but by stopping the thing it was doing to remain closed, by releasing the tension that held the petals in their protective bud. She had been holding since dawn the full accumulation of the Mercury, Kronos, Hades transmission, had been holding the gate, managing the flow. In the first second of totality, she released the gate. The voices came. They came not in sequence, but simultaneously. Not a chorus, because a chorus implies a conductor and a common score. And this was not that. This was the full simultaneous transmission of everything that every dead person whose message had been entrusted to the Mercury, Kronos, Hades channel had to say, arriving at once, layering through her body and out of her mouth in a language that was all languages and none of them. That was pure meaning before meaning becomes speech. That was the sound the universe makes when it is trying to communicate something important, and has finally found a body equal to the task of transmission. To the others in the bowl, what they heard from Callista in that first moment of totality was indescribable in the ordinary sense. Not because it was supernatural, but because it was so completely and immediately received that description felt beside the point. They heard it in the place where things are understood before they are processed. They heard their own names in voices they did not recognize and had always known. They heard the specific message that had been waiting for each of them, not through any external supernatural mechanism, but through the simple fact that Callista carried the record of everything, and the record of everything contained for each of them exactly what they most needed to receive. For Lysander, the voice was his grandmother's, Sarah's, young and specific and speaking in the dialect of the eastern provinces that he had not previously known he had an ancestral claim to. She was not forgiving him. She was not accusing him. She was telling him what she had always known and what her blood had always known, and what she had seeded in her descendant lines as the thing he was supposed to do with the Regulus inheritance. The royal star is not the star of the king who sits above. It is the star of the one who stands between the people and the storm. It always was. The lion does not rule the savannah. The lion protects it. Lysander put his hand on the summer crown that he had not brought, but that he had been carrying in his mind since the 25th of July, since Callista's first delivery of the truth. He put his hand on the shape of it in the air above his lion gray hair, and he lowered his hand, and the crown lowered with it. And he felt something release from his spine that he had not known was held there. The posture of command, the specific architecture of the man who was always above. He felt his spine settle. He felt his feet on the ground. He felt, for the first time in 30 years, like a person rather than an office. He did not weep yet. That would come in a moment. But the thing that was building in his chest, the pressure that had been there since the seal broke and the torch went out on the 20th of July, the pressure that had been building through the revelation and the financial dismantling and the journeying south and the night around the fire, was moving towards its exit. He could feel it building towards his eyes. He let it. For Morrigan, in the totality darkness, Lilith spoke, not through Callista, directly, in the dark, and the specific voice that Morrigan had first heard in the dream 2 weeks ago, the voice of the serpent-crowned woman who had dissolved into the marsh water. The voice of the first exile, the first woman who had refused submission and been cast out for it. The voice of every version of that refusal across every lifetime in which it had been necessary. The exile is complete, Lilith said, and it was not a benediction and not a celebration. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered with the tone of an accountant who has balanced a very long-running ledger. The account is settled. What you carried for 18 years was mine to carry. Mine and all the others before you. You carried it faithfully. Now put it down. The crossroads is here. The moment is now. Morgan drove the knife into the earth beside her feet. Not violently, with the specific intention of burial, of returning a thing to the ground that had been keeping it from the ground for 18 years. Alright. She drove it into the hilts, into the dark volcanic soil of the bowl, and she released it, and she felt the release travel up through her hands and into her arms and through her chest and out of her body in a wave that was neither cold nor warm, but was the specific temperature of something that had been held for a very long time and has finally been set free, the temperature of release which has no other analog. She stood in the totality darkness with her hands empty, and she looked up at the corona, and she said silently and completely, I am no longer the exile. I am whatever comes after the exile. I am beginning that now, in this darkness, in this bowl, in the presence of these 4 people and this crowned darkness and this burning silence. For Zephyr, the voice came from a direction they had not expected, not from Callista and not from the network, but from inside the glass vial, which they had opened in the first second of totality, following the instinct that had told them the timing was now, and had drunk, and the taste of which was exactly as it had smelled, salt water and dark root and iron, and which moved through them with the immediate authority of medicine that knows exactly what it is for and what it is treating. The voice said in their own voice, "Now, everything you've built the courage for, say your name and send the manifesto." They opened the transmission in the darkness, the 2-minute window of perfect shadow, the moment when the eclipse geometry made every satellite and every interceptor temporarily blind to the specific frequencies Uranus and Gemini had always preferred. They sent the manifesto with their name on it, their actual name. The name their mother had given them and that no operational document had ever contained. The name that made the gift theirs, and traceable and real. The lightning moved through the network in the pattern that lightning always moves, not in a line, in all directions, following every path available to it simultaneously, reaching every receiver that had ever been tuned to this frequency, arriving everywhere at once the way truth does when it finally finds its full voice. The manifesto went out. It was received in 17 cities and 43 nodes, in the private devices of hundreds of people who had been waiting for the specific document without knowing it was coming. The transmission arrived, complete, signed, undeniable. Prometheus unchained, the fire given, the name on the gift. Zephyr stood in the totality darkness, and they felt the electrical charge of Uranus move through them, from the soles of their feet to the crown of their head, the full voltage of the lightning god acknowledging the work, and they did not feel like a god. They felt like a person who had done something that mattered, which is better. The feeling of mattering is sustainable in a way that the feeling of divinity never is. For Saren, in the totality, there was no voice. There was only the feeling, expanding, continuing, the expansion that had begun when the gate opened, now arriving at its fullest expression in the 2 minutes of eclipse darkness. The Saturn-Hades wall that had stood between their soul and its release, they could feel it now, in the way you feel something that is no longer there. By its absence, by the space it had occupied that was now open. The wall was down, not breached, not dissolved. The karmic account was settled, as Callista had promised it could be settled, at this site, on this day, in this darkness. What the wall had been holding closed was now open, and what was opening into that space was not dramatic. It was not lights or thunder or vision. It was simply possibility. The feeling of a future that had not been predetermined by a past that was older than this life. The feeling of being, for the first time, actually free to choose what came next. Because the choice was no longer being made by the karmic machinery, but by the person, the actual present tense living person. the actual present living tense person, standing in the eclipse darkness on the highland plateau with Antares and Aldebaran on the opposite horizons, and 4 other people around them, and the corona blazing overhead. They looked at the corona. They looked at it for the full 2 minutes and some seconds of totality. All 5 of them looked at it, at the crown of the hidden sun, at the fire that was always burning, but was only visible when the blinding disk of ordinary day was covered, at the light that the light concealed, and none of them looked away. Callista's voice was still moving through the space, through the layered simultaneous transmission, and then it changed. The way a wave changes when it begins its return journey from the shore, the energy not diminishing but redirecting, and what came out of her in the final seconds of totality was not the voices of the dead, but her own voice, the voice of Callista of Therion, the oracle who carried the dead and had for 35 years, and had never spoken in that channel in her own name. She said in her own voice the thing that was true about all 5 of them, and about every human being who had ever watched an eclipse and felt the terror and the beauty simultaneously. This is what you are, not the light you project, what remains when the projector is covered. This, the corona, the light that the light was hiding. You are this. And then the sun returned. Alright, so we're going to leave this here. We didn't finish the last part because we ran out of time. But we have part 5, and then there's the coda after the lights. And then there's just like let me see, an astrological codex, which is pretty interesting. Alright, so I will catch you on the next one. Bye!